Hello, I think we are live now. There's always that moment when you are not quite sure when you are setting these up. But hello, everyone, and welcome. I have a very special guest who is also a Canberran, but I didn't know her before I invited her on here. So that was, in fact, a pleasant surprise. And that is, in fact, Kerry Howard. Welcome, Kerry.
Thank you, Serina.
It is Kerry is an expert in trauma and mental health. She's written a book recently called The Trouble with Trauma, which provides insights into how our traumatic experiences affect our psychological world, which is very timely in today's COVID environment. So I'm sure we're going to have a lot to talk about. If you are online, please say hi so that I can acknowledge you. And I'm always love questions. So, Kerry, I thought we might first talk a little bit about some of the royal scandal and trauma stuff. So,
Yeah.
I know you've written an article that was in the Canberra Times in response to the series that Prince Harry has done about his own mental health challenges.
Yeah, it was interesting because if you've got Apple TV, it's called The Me You Can't See. And he's an interesting person. And when a lot of the things came out where he and Meghan first sort of got together, and then he started talking about the impact of, what was happening within the royal family. I heard a lot of people talking broadly about the fact that, how could this person, say they were traumatized, they had nothing going on. It's kind of like, he lost his mother when he was really young, and it was a really kind of, I mean, it was a big deal at the time for the whole world, let alone,
Yeah, it
this young
was.
man who then had to grieve in the public eye. And so it's been interesting to look at his relationship with Meghan and how that's progressed, because she obviously had some awareness of trauma therapies, and because she encouraged him to actually undertake EMDR therapy, which is our primary sort of level 1 treatment for PTSD. And he talks about the benefits that he had personally from doing that, and has become a real positive advocate for taking action on resolving those issues to improve your mental health overall.
I find it interesting, isn't it, that sometimes when people do have mental health issues, that others are very quick to judge and go, oh, you're being a whinger. It's not such a big deal. I did it much worse than that, and I don't have mental health issues. But if things affect people differently, don't they?
Oh, they absolutely do. And I honestly, if you have a look at what the way he's open, he's very open in that. And Oprah as well. And they interview quite a few celebrities and things who talk openly about their traumatic experiences and the difficulties that they've sort of had in trying to overcome them or move through them. And I think, I often talk about the fact that modern psychology tends to teach people to repress those things rather than actually processing them. And, we need to give people better ways and strategies to be able to work through those issues rather than, just kind of pretending they didn't happen.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because resilience is so important, as you know, and it's something that's talked about a lot. And it is an important coping mechanism, but just saying, oh, I'm resilient, there is no problem is also, I guess, not the way.
No, often what people kind of consider as resilient is actually not. It's repression. They're just pushing stuff away and pretending that it's not affecting them. And that's actually not the same. Resilience is the ability to recognize when something that's happened to you is triggering and causing a problem, and actually trying to work a way through it, as opposed to just pretending it's not there. Really different.
I want to acknowledge that we've got some people online. We've got Liz Lim all the way from Taiwan. I think she's in Taipei at the moment, and also Amanda, who are online. And Liz has given us an awesome and a clap. Thank you, Liz.
Awesome. That's good. It's interesting to see where, sometimes how far we reach. We don't realize when we're doing these sorts of things that we could touch somebody who's in Taipei.
Well, that's it. You never do realize, who you're reaching with your messages. And I guess when people have, mental health or trauma issues, you never realize, who you're helping by, how you're reaching out.
And also, one of the things that I say in the book is people like Brene Brown. The reason that Brene Brown's talk, for those of you who know about her vulnerability talk on TED, one of the reasons that her vulnerability talk was so impactful was because while she's talking about vulnerability, she was being vulnerable. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things that's a really key thing. I always say to people, you show me somebody who's inspirational, and I'll show you somebody who's had difficulties and been prepared to stand up and speak openly about them. And I count myself in that same vein. I help people with their PTSD, but I've had PTSD myself, so I understand it's challenging. But I also understand that you can work through it and overcome.
Well, thank you for sharing, your own vulnerability. Is this what led you to do the work that you do now?
Primarily, yes. So it's interesting because I got hit by a bus as a pedestrian, and this was
Oh,
back in 1998, and I was only 1 year into my psychology degree. I'd gone back as a mature student, and I had young children, so I had two daughters, 2 and 4, when I got hit by the bus. And there was an article in the City News a few years ago where I talked about the bus saving my life. And it sounds like a really weird thing to say, but it gave me an opportunity to examine a lot of the things that I'd been repressing up until that point. I would have liked to have done it in not quite such a dramatic way, but in the end, you've just got to work with what you work with. And I often say to people, what's a better opportunity is if we can take steps to resolve those issues that we have, without having to get hit by a bus to do it. I think it would be much better.
without having to be hit by a bus. I think that's going to be something that I'm always going to remember because, we often do say colloquially, I feel like I was being hit by a bus for something.
Oh, and do you know what, Serina? You're not going to believe it, but that song was actually in the charts when I got hit by a bus. I
I
actually
actually
did a
don't
thing
know
about
that. I can't.
I was going to do a TED talk, and that's how I introduced it. I was singing it, I walked under a bus, I got hit by a train, and I'm like, I hate that song.
Well, we're definitely going to have to share it in the group because I hadn't made that connection. But I guess in terms of traumatic events and feeling like you've been hit by a bus in this sense, in a metaphorical sense rather than a physical, as it was for you, I guess COVID has been a bit like that for a lot of business owners, hasn't it?
Yeah, and I think because the uncertainty around businesses, especially when we go into snap lockdowns, depending on the type of business that you run, we often see a massive, drop initially, and even me, the private psychology practice, people kind of go, "How could things have dropped off for you?" But much like everybody else, the minute that things kind of become uncertain, everybody just it's like deer in the headlights, and we all just sort of stop and go, "Oh." Don't do anything because I'm not sure what's going to happen next. And so
Yeah.
it takes about, I've noticed between last year and this year, it takes a good month to 6 weeks before people kind of, can move forward past that. And that just depends on their circumstances. Even if they've got ongoing income coming in, everybody still kind of does that initial freeze. We don't know what to do, so we're not going to do anything and cancel everything that's unnecessary. And it's hard on businesses because, you've got staff. I think a big part of what's happened this year was it's different to what happened with JobKeeper last year. And a lot of business people are really confused about that and uncertain about what, the longer term opportunities may be for them. We hear a lot about some people who pivot and they've done things like, change the way that their business operates. But that's not always possible for every business. So yeah, it's been really challenging, I think.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. And it does take a lot of courage to make those sorts of changes. And, I made the mistake last year of using that pivot word for a friend who perhaps didn't want to hear it. And I don't think I've ever been forgiven. And I didn't mean it in a bad way, to be honest. I thought she actually had some amazing things that she might have been doing anyway. But it is a hard thing. And even though I think of myself as being resilient and agile, I sat on something for about a month before I'd make a decision. And specifically what it was is I'm hosting an event for Women's Entrepreneurship Day on the 19th of November, and it was going to be in person. And I really had my heart set on it being person. And I was sort of in denial, waiting for signs that the numbers were going to drop until last week, actually the week before last, where I went, right, finally, we're going to do it virtually. We're going to do it online, completely changed it. And of course, now we've got a new pathway. So now I probably have to change parts of it back again.
That's COVID though, isn't it? Because it's
Yes.
this idea that, and that's actually why it causes so many problems for us, because we get into a place where it's very difficult to make plans, and you don't feel like, even when you do make plans, you've got to be really flexible with them. And so a lot of people, and I think this depends on whether or not you're more of an optimist than a pessimist. If you're an optimist, you keep making the plans, and then just when they get thwarted at the end, it's kind of like, oh, try something else, you know. I think the pessimists just sit back and go, I'm not making any plans until I know for sure that I can make plans. And that's a very difficult thing to do in business in particular, because you need to make plans. We need to at least have the next 3 months mapped out of what's going to happen, and, you know, what does this mean for our overheads and bills and staffing, and, you know, the lead up to Christmas and all of these things that are going to impact. But it's interesting, isn't it? Sometimes I find out little things that I didn't know, like, you know, who knew that women's that whole entrepreneurship celebration of women in entrepreneurship fell on my birthday. Wow.
Well, fabulous. You're going to have to come to some events now. So I'll send you details when they're there.
Yeah, I think it's a Friday.
It is a Friday this year.
Yeah.
But yeah, I must say too, though, as someone, you know, who is fairly new to the entrepreneurship business world, you know, I really felt like I should be pivoting and I should have a clear plan. And, you know, particularly when I was talking to speakers and other people who are interested in the event, I felt like I should have, you know, show professionalism by having all these plans. But actually, I didn't really know what was happening because I didn't know what I would be allowed to do at that time. And it was really difficult.
Yeah. And I think that's what people struggle with the most with COVID. It's actually this sense of not being in control. It's almost a sense of powerlessness. And, you know, I'm a bit the same, like all my family, not in Canberra. So, you know, I don't actually have, my daughters are in Melbourne. You know, I've got other family who are all in other states, and I can't see them and haven't been able to see them, you know, for quite some time. I haven't seen my girls since, well, Easter was the last time I saw them, actually. So it's really tough, I think, when we're in that situation where we want to be able to do things and connect with those people who are important to us and our loved ones. But also, you know, I got offered an opportunity only 2 days ago to do some consultancy work that's in Queensland. And I'm like, I don't even know when they're going to allow me to come. You know, it's hard.
It is. It is, and it is hard for particularly sectors like tourism and so forth, because, you know, usually they rely on people booking a long way out and, you know, they can't do that. So, look, it is difficult. And I think, you know, the key thing that I can sense from you is not just putting, you know, your rose-colored glasses on and pretending it's all going to be fine and, you know, we should be happy all the time.
No, because that actually doesn't work. It's it's putting quite practical things in place. So on my Facebook page last week, I actually, because it was 6 weeks that we'd been in lockdown on Thursday night. So I did a Facebook Live post at that point where I demonstrated how to make yourself feel better using muscle memory. And basically you stick a pencil between your teeth or a pen and, you know, stand in your Wonder Woman pose, you know, hands on hips. And if you do that for at least 60 seconds, because of the muscle memory, specifically around your face, your brain is thinking that you're smiling, therefore you must be happy. And so you actually start to feel happier. And so I say to people, you know, if you can wake up every morning and get your Wonder Woman pants on and stick a chopstick between your teeth and, you know, just smile and face the world for a bit. And I find sunshine is another one that really helps, like when we can get outside. You know, Canberra last weekend, I mean, was just stunning, beautiful sunshine. Shh, don't tell anybody that we actually get a lot of sun, right? Because they think it's cold and so they don't want to come here. And we don't really want lots of people coming because then it won't be so nice anymore. It'll be overcrowded and we don't want that. So We like being able to go 5-minute commutes, right? Rather than an hour across town. Oh my goodness. Anyway, so there were
I hear you.
a few things like that that I just sort of said, these are some of the practical things that you can do, because can we just tell ourselves to feel happier when we are not in control of our lives? No, actually, it doesn't work. So we just got to try and do the little things that we know that we can do. So then on the weekend, I put up another post and I said, try these half a dozen things to sort of help make you feel a bit better. And
Mm.
yes, it does you do hit a bit of a, slump at 6 weeks. We hit one at 3 weeks, 6 weeks, then 3 months, 6 months. Please let us not be here at 3 months. I feel for people in Sydney, Melbourne last year, I have family there. I understand it's awful. But then coming out of it too, I don't know if you've noticed, but even now that we can have, 5 people picnicking in the park, and then we all kind of go out to the park and see how many groups of people there are and start to get a bit panicky.
I noticed as soon as that came into effect, I think it came into effect on 5 p.m. on a Friday, and I was actually out for a walk, and I've just started jogging again. Very slowly. I actually walk faster than I jog, but that's not the point.
Oh,
And I noticed all of these picnics at twilight all along the cycle path. And on one hand, it was really lovely. And they were mainly young people, I think mainly teenagers, and they were all exactly 5 people. They were all completely abiding by the rule. They were all very separate. They were even quite separate amongst each other. Many of them had masks on. But yeah, it was a bit like, oh, wow, this feels, should I be reporting this? No, but it's actually okay.
that's right. And it feels very odd. And the longer that it goes on, because, and this is the thing people don't understand about how our psyche adapts. So, whenever these kind of change of systems come into play, then, we don't like it to begin with. But once we sort of got past that 3-week mark, we start to kind of, adjust a bit, even though we don't like it. Then the 6 weeks, we kind of usually hit another hiccup. We don't like it, but we get used to it. And it's actually the getting used to it then that we have to then experience in reverse when things get opened up again, that when we go out into public to begin with, it feels weird, and it's kind of like, oh, I don't touch me, and don't come too close, and all of that sort of stuff, and goodness, don't cough or sneeze in public, please. It's just bizarre what we do. And we've got hay fever here, right? So it's quite
Yeah.
legit that there's lots of people that might have the sniffles, or but it's helping people to actually understand that there's this normal part of adjustment that we have to go through as human beings, and that's why it feels uncomfortable. And the other thing is that when I talk about the fact that we all vibrate at that same kind of level, when we talk about fear, it's quite a heavy, low vibrational feel. So you'll remember when COVID first hit last year, there was like, if you went into the supermarket, it's like everybody was on tenterhooks. Like, it really felt
Yeah.
awful in the community, because everybody's vibrating in this fear, because we don't know what's going to happen next, and we don't know whether or not everybody around us is going to be okay. And illness is one of those things that feels really out of control. And so they're all sort of challenging times, and that adjustment point. And that's why we're starting to see, like, we're seeing lots of agitation in different places, because it comes to that point where people kind of go, they're trying to agitate for change. Now, rightly or wrongly, and I'm not here to have a political debate, but it is why people then at certain points in time will start to kind of band together and go, we're not happy with this situation, and we just have to kind of recognize and try and help people through it the best way that we can.
Yeah, I've noticed from relatives in Melbourne, particularly last year, that for a while I was talking to my dad every day during lockdown,
Yeah.
and his moods were quite different. Some days he was like, I'm totally fine. I'm doing my sculpture in the backyard. I'm doing gardening. We're all healthy. We're fine. Other days he was like in denial. I don't believe this is real. Have you ever met anyone who's had COVID? It's totally not real. And in any case, it's nowhere near me. It's those people in the western suburbs. They're nowhere near me. Other days he's just very angry, like those, political people, they're like dictators. How dare they tell us what to do?
Yeah.
And then other times, quite sad. So that whole range of emotions. And it was just because I was observing it from a distance, I could see, yeah, there's all those different stages. And I guess they're almost those stages of grief, aren't they?
That's exactly what I was going to say, because they are the stages of grief. And you know, grief, like anything, it's a change process, right? So the stages that we go through are the experiences that we kind of have around it are because we've got a change that's happened, and we need to take some time to adapt to it. Now, you know, there's a difference between, and that's where I talk about processing our way through things properly rather than just repressing them. And when we start to see a lot of the stuff that came out last year, where a lot of people were sort of talking about the conspiracy theories and all of those sorts of things, it's just purely and simply based on the fact that their fear is combined with you know, I want to say a limited access to information, or access to information that's, you know, put in a particular way that then, you know, if they've got too much time on their hands, they jump on that bandwagon and then they just, you know, perpetuate it. Now, we do that in all sorts of areas, not just COVID. We didn't need a pandemic to show that we can group together, like we talk about it in psychology, the groupthink idea, where people will band together and they share common beliefs. And, you know, we see that in all sorts of organizations in our community. And it's just gives, you know, a certain group of people a particular avenue or a way to focus. And, you know, I'm a big believer in, we don't really need to judge what doesn't impact us. So, you know, if people want to believe that, well, that's okay. As long as the beliefs don't get to a point where they're really kind of out of control and people are doing some strange things. But on the flip side, if, you know, I don't get into the vaccination debate because, you know, I can make my own decision, and I'll often say to clients they need to weigh up the balance of probability stuff in their own life and make their own decision. And the issue that we're now seeing is, but when it impacts the rest of the community. So, you know, we've seen lots of numbers touted around about, well, at what percentage of vaccination rates can we open up the community? And there's a lot of argument about whether or not people who are vaccinated, not vaccinated, all of these things. At the end of the day, I think you do what's right for you. And then even as business owners, we've got to make some decisions about what's
True.
right for us. I was only having that conversation this morning with somebody about, can you legitimately ask somebody whether they've been vaccinated?
This is a really important issue, you know, as particularly in those service industries, which do involve a lot of people contact.
Yeah.
You know, you've got a duty of care, presumably, to others, to your employees, to other employees, to your customers. You know, it's not enough, I think, anymore just to sort of say, you know, people have an individual right. You've also got to look at the rights of other people, particularly, you know, where there may be vulnerable people with compromised immune systems. It's a very tricky moral space, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think from an ethical perspective, there is a balance there. And I often talk about the different, we go through this every time we go through a social change. So we go from no, it's no, that doesn't exist. And I want you to think about harassment and bullying like in the 80s. No, no, it doesn't exist. There's none. They're all good, you know. And then fast forward 30, 40 years and you've got, oh my goodness, it's everywhere, you know. And we've raised this
Funnily
whole,
enough.
oh, well, surprise, surprise. But we've raised, but now we've got an opposite problem, right? Because we've raised a whole generation of young people with this kind of like, you know, oh, I'm anxious, you can't bully me, all of that. Like I'm holding up my, like a get out of jail free card, and I'm really not trying to downplay it because I completely get it. But what we haven't done then is given them that next step of, okay, so we can recognize the anxiety and we validate that it's there. But what can we do to help you take a step today that means tomorrow will be easier for you to manage your anxiety, right? Now, that's the missing key, because what we see a lot, and I'm going to blame my own profession for a lot of this stuff too, it's kind of like, oh, no, 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 we protect them like they're children, and we're not going to allow them to be exposed. Now, we need to do that to a certain extent, but there also comes a point where what we need to do is help people to recover. And I say in this book, right, I talk about the fact that survival is miraculous, but recovery is a choice. And making the choice to actually recover and move through things, you know, to choose to recover is actually much harder because it requires a lot more work personally, than being able to kind of like check out of the world because I'm accepting that I'm a survivor or in that sort of victim space. And
Mm.
it's not, it's not a judgment, it's just a recognition that a big part of our ability to recover has an awful lot to do with a sense of feeling like there's a purpose to our recovery too.
Yeah, that's a very good point too. And, I think, in terms of trauma, it can be, physical events. It can also be emotional events. It can be a range of things. I guess one of the best pieces of advice I got was, that what has happened doesn't always define you. It isn't the sum total of what you've been through. There are so
No.
many other personas that you've got, but you do get a lot of sort of sympathy and empathy when you've been through something. I know when my lovely husband had a heart attack, coming up to 4 years ago now, he had so many visitors and he had flowers and he had all of that. And it's really tempting, I think, on some level that you feel a bit special, some
Yeah.
level to sort of keep that going.
Yeah. Well, I can understand it too because it's like, finally it's like I get a chance to step into the limelight. Like, oh, all of a sudden all these people have noticed that I'm actually here. And I mean, what's lovely about it is all those people let him know that they actually do value him and think he's important in their lives. It's one of the funny things I say, wouldn't it be great if we could all actually be at our own wake before it happened? I
And not
think
to wait until it happened.
no, that's right. Because I just sort of think we often, and goes back to what we were saying about where people are viewing from, we often don't recognize the sort of spread, especially with the internet, the spread of information and how far the things that we kind of talk about go and what positive influence we might be able to have in somebody else's life. And, I often see that when you get to somebody's funeral, that's when most of those people are standing there saying, we thought this person was a wonderful person. And I often think, wouldn't it be fantastic if you could somehow have some sort of living wake and see how many people
Yeah.
actually value you?
This is a good point. I had about 3 funerals in 3 months earlier this year, for various reasons. And the tragedy was that two of those three people were people, you know, I did consider as friends. And obviously, I was invited to the funeral and I was there. But they were both people that I hadn't yet known for long periods of time. They'd only come into my life fairly recently, both through different associations. And sitting there at their wake and hearing about their stories and realizing how many interests we shared, it was just so incredibly sad for me that I hadn't made more of an effort in the limited time I'd known them to really get to know them.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those things get raised in the moment because it's it's the recognition of a lost opportunity, right? But our lives, by the same token, to be fair, are very busy. Well, especially when you've got young family and you're doing all of these other things, and you've got work and you've got other interests and commitments, and it's constant. This sort of play for our time. I want to say the
Yeah.
constant feeling that we're kind of trying to plug up 20 different holes. And yet, if we go back to what COVID was like and in lockdown, we still tend to have a reach to a particular group, because they say you can't really have close, supportive, intimate relationships outside of about half a dozen people or so that you would say that you were really pretty close to, because the need to maintain that kind of connection, uh, it takes time, and on top of all of
Yeah.
the other things that we have in life, it sometimes it's hard to try and expand it more than that group or that size of group, so it's tricky.
It is. Now, I have one final question for you, which is, obviously a lot of small businesses and other business owners are going through really difficult times during lockdown and COVID, and for many of them, even before that, during the bushfires. So, if you know someone who is really struggling, they're not sure whether to keep their business operating or not, they're not sure whether they need to make major changes or not, how can you be there and be supportive to someone like that?
I think a big part of it is often hearing without jumping into fixing the problem for them, because a lot of people just need an opportunity to talk through some of those challenges with somebody who's actually listening to them rather than trying to fix it for them. And I think it's also then asking, somebody does come to you, because this happens not just in business, but it happens in any relationship where, it's kind of like, well, somebody comes to you and they start talking to you about a problem that they have. We really should be asking permission to fix it for them. We shouldn't necessarily jump in and try and fix it. And I say this to parents with their children as well, because one of the things that we have to do is validate this person's ability to recognize that within them they do actually have the skills and the knowledge and the understanding to be able to resolve it for themselves in the way that will work for them. And I think it's that bit, it's that sense of validating this person's experiences and asking them what you can do to support them, but not jumping in necessarily and trying to tell them they just need to do it this way. And I think we jump in and try and come to the solution really quickly because it makes us feel like we're helping, or we often negate somebody else's feelings because we don't know how to deal with it. So we tell them that, oh, don't worry about that. It was kind of like, but they are worried about that. So you can't just, negate somebody's experience, right? So a big part of this, and you'll hear this with your friends, if you're talking about something that's a problem for you and you're talking to a friend and they'll say, oh, don't think about that. It's kind of like, or I don't know how you expect somebody to just switch that thing in their brain that turns that off.
Yeah.
That's not how it works.
Yeah, it's like relationship breakdowns. Oh, yeah, just stop thinking about him, just get over it. Well, I mean, we all know now that, relationships, love has, powerful hormones at place, and, it affects the brain and, affects the makeup. And they do say that a breakup is a bit like, coming off heroin.
Oh,
it's a really hard thing to mentally to get over. So just saying, oh, just stop thinking about it. Well, yeah, look, I'm trying.
I'm sorry.
You think I want to be like this?
Can you top up the dopamine that's just suddenly left my brain? Because all of those things do impact, right? And what you see behind me here is something actually that I unpack, and it's part of the cover of the book, where I talk about our self-management system. The book I wrote because COVID put such pressure on psychology as a profession to fix the issues that I'm kind of like, I can't possibly meet that demand. And yet, so in the book, I explain, well, how do we get here? What do we need to do? Here's the self-management system that you can learn to understand for yourself. I've even just released a 2-hour training program to help people unpack it a bit further. Because if we're waiting one-on-one, I don't know about you, if you know this or not, but in Canberra, like the wait for a psychologist is more than 9 months. So it's just silly to think that, coming to see somebody one-on-one is the only way that we can help people.
Thank you. That's really good advice. And I didn't realize that the wait was that long. But actually, now that I think of it, yeah, that does actually make total sense.
Well, it's unfortunate because there's less than 3,000 psychologists in private practice in this country. So, you do the math, 2.5, like 25 million people. There just isn't enough. And so part of what I've been trying to do in the last most of this year anyway, is develop ways to help educate people to help themselves, because there is a lot of stuff. I know we all like to think that we're really unique, okay? But there's a lot of things about human beings that are common. And helping people to understand those things is, what I'm trying to do to help just raise that awareness and empower them to help themselves.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. So people can read your book, obviously, and connect with your regular Facebook Lives. Please leave your details in the chat in the Joyful Business Club after this session so that people can find you.
Thank you. And thank you, Serina, for having me. It was a really, really great conversation on a wet and rainy Canberra day.
Thank you so much as well. Really appreciate it.